Everyone, thank you and welcome. Today I have the pleasure of joining or talking with Brad Cantwell. Brad is the CEO of Arcadia Settlements Group. I met Brad in April when I was doing a presentation at the annual meeting of the National Structured Settlement Trade Association. Say that 5 times fast. We actually met the day before at a dinner event being hosted by the Women's Caucus. Now, my presentation to the group was on the importance of leading DEIB, and the Women's Caucus was having a dinner the night before. So that's when Brad and I met. And I learned immediately how much he understood the importance of groups like the Women's Caucus and how there's a challenge, particularly of leaders, of gaining buy-in across a number of stakeholders. And in a conversation, I think, Brad, we had about a month or so ago, in talking about that, it gave rise to this topic that we're having today. So that wasn't an intro, I guess, so much as a backstory, but thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jina.
Now, the first question, of course, why is this topic important to you? You know, we talked about this, and so can you share your thoughts around just what we mean by the leadership balancing it?
Sure. I think we'll get into the challenges and opportunities that leaders have in organizations around diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. But to get to your question, why is this important, and what put me next to you in that dinner at the Women's Caucus meeting in Washington, D.C. A couple of months ago, it's clear that I'm in an industry like many others that looked and sounded a certain way for a long time and hadn't really valued all the voices that we should have for, and we hurt for it. In my own company, I will tell you that among the very top performers, we have women, we have people of color, we have people with disabilities, and it has taken a long time to get there. When I started, it's 32 years ago in this industry. It's 32 years on one hand is a very long time, on the other hand goes rather quickly. But we had kind of a stratification of roles primarily, where the leadership and the most outward facing parts of our profession were completely dominated by men, mostly white men, mostly white men of a fairly uniform age, middle-aged. And as we have expanded over time, who is actually getting a seat at the table, we've performed better. And clearly at our national organization, the Structured Settlements Trade Association that you mentioned, having women have their own caucus, it's one of the most energizing things that's happened in our industry in a long time, frankly.
So a couple of questions, but before we do that, I want to go ahead and let's knock one of the polling questions out. Can we do the first polling question, Autumn?
Sure, let me get that up and running here. All right, y'all should be able to see poll number 1 on your screen. For those who just joined us, we'll have 4 during the presentation, and you need to answer at least 3 of them to earn full credit. I'll leave each open for a minute to make sure everyone has an opportunity to vote.
So which one is this one? How involved are leaders in your organization with diversity and inclusion? So Brad, when this is over, I'm going to toss a question to you from something you said. You were talking about, you know, your organization is diverse, but it took a long time to get there. And as soon as you said that, I thought, long time because of retention, long time because the humans that work in your industry aren't very diverse, long time because you couldn't get them to work for you. So I'll give you a moment to think about that while we wait for the
Sure.
close.
All right, we're almost there at 90%. Again, this is poll number 1 out of 4. A couple more seconds here. Interesting results coming in. All right, I'm going to close this one down in 3, 2, and 1, and I'll share those results with you. It's kind of a close tie, but 29% led with very involved.
You know, that's promising. And then the next one was 24% somewhat involved. And so it looks like we have over half where the leadership is at least involved. All right, so Brad, I pitched a question to you. You know, you talk about it took a long time to get to diversity.
Yeah,
Is there any
let me
particular
first,
factor driving that?
I better first, if you don't mind, I better backpedal a little bit. It
Okay.
took a long time to get to the beginnings of diversity. We're far from really reflecting the audience that we truly serve. We've got a long way still to go, but we were unbelievably non-diverse for a long time. And so the reasons, there are a lot of reasons. And I would assume that a lot of these are common to many organizations. If you go back to long enough, you don't have to go back too long to the point where there was very deliberate exclusion of women, exclusion of non-white people in positions of authority in organizations. And there were, there was a time when there were, which hopefully is mostly gone, when there were explicit bars that, and then often I think companies would
Bars
justify
as
it.
in
I'm sorry.
going out to drink bars? Or
No,
you're
no,
talking about
no. I mean
the
barriers.
strata?
Let's say barrier, a bar,
Barrier.
a barrier.
Just checking.
Yeah, I should say a barrier. And there were, and I remember hearing them. They came usually in this sort of well, our clients are, and fill in the blank. Our clients are conservative. Our clients are old-fashioned. Our
They won't be
clients,
comfortable with it. Right.
yeah, you didn't hear people saying our clients are racist, our clients are sexist, our clients are homophobic. But there was this justification that, look, if we want to be successful in this sphere, we have to serve this group that is mostly, again, dominated by white men. There was that time. But then even when you had sort of good intentions, and some of that started to fall away, you ended up with an organization, and ours is no different, my company, my industry, where once you have a certain group that's sort of dominating, and of course, in positions of responsibility, where they find other people is in that limited circle. So you could be thinking, I'm looking for the best candidates. I really don't have a preference, whether they're white or male or whatever, but where you're looking is where
I can't find them. Yeah.
you can't find them. You're looking in your neighborhood. You're looking at your institutions of your social institutions, and those happen to be largely not non-diverse. And so that's one of the ways it happens.
And the thing is, that's true of all of our industries, and that's true of us as humans. We tend to function. Some interesting data is available if anyone goes out and looks for it, that all of us live in bubbles. So pick your race, pick your gender, pick your religion, pick your ethnicity, and then look outside of your group. And that most of us don't have a lot of friends outside our own, now you can fill in the blanks, outside of our own religion, outside of our own socioeconomic level, outside of our own race or ethnicity. Statistically, anyway, there are always exceptions, and there are many of us where those groups are broadening. But that's the exception and not the rule. So it's interesting you say that. And by the way, our attendees today are from across the accounting profession. And so the accounting industry serves, other than those who are tax preparers that sort of serve on the front lines, those who serve corporate America or work inside corporate America in accounting departments, they tend to work at different socioeconomic levels than maybe some of your clients. Now, I want to eventually get to the conversation around the leadership barrier, but I think the walking the line that you have to do, but I think it'd be helpful if you shared who are your clients that in your industry that are served, and why is that relevant to your levels of diversity that you were talking about?
That's great. We have multiple levels of clients, Jina. We have the end beneficiaries of the work we do tend to be people who have been severely injured, the families of people who have been killed in accidents. What we do, structured settlements, is we help settle lawsuits or workers' compensation claims where somebody's been seriously injured and may need replacement of income for as long as a lifetime, future medical care funds, maybe need to do other things to coordinate with public benefits or to take care of family members after a severe accident. That's the primary work we do. And as you might imagine, the group of people who find themselves in that circumstance, they are absolutely as diverse as you can get. They look like the entire population. They often are people with disabilities, either as a result of what has happened to them or pre-existing disabilities. And if anything, they might skew a little more non-white, simply because a lot of dangerous professions are still people more with minority populations than white populations. So we have a very, very diverse end user that
Right.
we should, ideally be able to be relatable to them. We should understand the world they live in. They should feel relatable to us. But in between those people and our people are usually the insurance companies and their professionals, casualty insurers, claims professionals that work for those companies, and the attorneys who work for both the defendants in lawsuits involving physical injury and the lawyers that represent the injured parties and their families. Both of those groups tend to be even more diverse than our industry has been now. And so we, of all of those groups, we have often been the least diverse over time.
So there's a slide you have in here called questions to ask, and I'm looking at it. All right, hold on, I'll just put it up. And the reason I started thinking about it is because in talking about the balancing act for leaders, I think you and I were having a conversation that you've been in rooms that I might not get to go into. And either because of race or gender or level or role, because if I'm not in the C-suite, I don't get to go into that space, no matter the race or gender. And you've heard things because there's an assumption, particularly you, because looking at you, I'm thinking you're a white guy. And I don't say that tongue in cheek because people don't always appear what they to be. People always are what they appear. But somebody sees you and they can make a comment that maybe I will never hear even if I'm in the room. So what happens when you're the leader and somebody says something and you don't agree with it? There's this idea that when you're the leader, you can always say what you want to say. You have that power, but do you? I guess that's the crux of this conversation, because I'm looking at the slide and you say diversity, who's in the room and who's missing? And when do you have to speak to the people in the room or speak on behalf of the people who are missing? Just a few questions in there, Brad.
Yeah, no, that's a lot to unfold. So I will tell you to answer your first part, where you're talking about what rooms and conversations might I have been in that you wouldn't have been. When I was a consultant, before I was in the leadership position in my company, but most of the work that I've done in my career, I was a consultant working literally in mediations, in judges' chambers, trying to help find solutions to settle cases. In those rooms, here's a very common thing that will happen. A judge will hold a pretrial conference and they'll bring in representatives to talk about what's going on in a case. And is it something that can be settled, or does it need to proceed to trial? And oftentimes, as a structured settlement consultant, somebody who's trying to maximize the use of money to take care of people over a long period of time, I would be there with a claims professional on behalf of an insurance company, and also a defense attorney. We'd walk into judges' chambers, the three of us, and the judge would often immediately make an assumption. They would look at me, and especially depending on sort of the characteristics of the people. Let's imagine we had a white female attorney, and we had a Hispanic male claims professional, and you had me, and yes, white male. The judge would usually address me as counsel, assuming I was the attorney, even if I wasn't, and might even say to the people who really employed me in the case, the white woman and the Hispanic man in my example. You all might wait in the courtroom, I'm just going to talk to counsel, speaking to
Wow.
me. So that's kind of like, and then we'd have to deal with that. And
Right.
that was a kind of a gentle one. Less gently, go ahead, Jina.
Well, real quick, so a question came in that says, I don't understand the question. So, and I was kind of rambling all over the place. And I think so, I actually cleared it out. So I don't remember who it was, Liz, I think. The question I'm asking is, when you're in a room that I don't get to go into, what are some of the challenges that you face? Because you don't always get to say what you want to say. And sometimes you get presented with questions like the example you just gave that are a bit awkward. So that was the question, I think, if I simplified it, hopefully that helped.
Now that was an easy one that I posed. I gave you an easy one. I can just explain, I'm sorry, Your Honor, this is who we all are. And if you want me to wait in the courtroom, I will. And then oddly enough, they usually say, no, you can all stay. Because, you know, he was looking for them to leave, not me.
Really?
But, oh yeah, that's.
But okay, but how do you know that? And I don't think this is straying off the topic, only because there are nuances here. It's one of those things where when it happens to you, you kind of know it when you see it, but try describing it to somebody else.
Well, I will say that a lot of people may miss some of those signals. There are signals, and I may catch them because I grew up mostly with not white people. That was my childhood, and I saw this, you know, the differential treatment of people. So I may be a little more sensitive to some, that what he was really saying is, I want to talk to the white man. Would you other two wait? He wasn't, and it was an easy way to address me as counsel, like we two lawyers should be talking. And then when I cleared up, it was a little, a situation like that would be momentarily awkward. It wasn't somebody who was saying something awful. Now, there were times when people did say awful.
I was going to say, I think if I remember correctly, you've been in those rooms. And now you have to decide, are you going to say something? Or are you not going to say something? Depending on.
Yeah, there are times when, and it's particularly, I mean, it's just tricky for anybody in any position. You come into a room where you may not know everybody. You may be the vendor, so to speak. You have been hired by the others. These are your clients, and you're meeting for the first time. And you're right. They look at me and they think, oh, this is a white man. We're all in good company here. I can say what I want, right? We're on the same basis. And if they would say something racist or sexist, and sometimes shockingly so, by people highly educated, that it's shocking to me. The question is, how far do you go to deal with that? Do you say
call them out, or to just
call them out directly and say, I can't believe you just said that. That's the most racist thing I've heard in a long time. Do you sort of avoid it? You sort of pivot and change the subject, or do you go along with it? Of course, I've never done the latter, but I'm sure people have. They've thought, this is my business. I won't get my business, or whatever it might be, if I challenge folks. There is a way of making it clear that that was not really an acceptable thing to say, without being completely, without completely dominating the rest of the day by you're on two opposite sides of an issue. So it is that sort of I think there are a lot of people who find themselves in a business setting where they have to navigate, how do I stand up for somebody who's either here or alone in this room, while at the same time not completely derailing everything else we're meant to do today.
And I want to defend, this notion, because too often today we are on the path of righteousness, right? And this idea that somebody would just choose to stay silent, is easy to condemn or judge that person out of context. But I think all of us have been in that situation, and for a number of reasons we might stay silent. And it might be because I'm afraid to speak up. It might be because of the power dynamics in the room. It might be because I don't want to lose that client, and if I don't get this client, I'm not paying my mortgage. Okay, maybe not that directly, but I just want to acknowledge that it's not always that easy to stay silent. It might cost you something, the psychology, the emotion, whatever the case may be. So it's easy to say, well, that person didn't say anything, therefore they don't have fill in the blank, something we're going to judge on them. You know, they don't have strength of character, or they're not living up to their values. And just the whole reason I wanted us to talk about this is none of this is black and white. And maybe I shouldn't have said black and white, but none of it is.
You're right. I will tell you, it's not like I practiced any of this, not like I went to school to learn it, but I will tell you over the years, one of the things that I have found to be a kind of a useful strategy when you're in a situation like that, where somebody is treating like you're in the in group. We are in an in group. And I'm going to talk about somebody here or not here who is in the out group. And to me, if it's something that's clearly makes me uncomfortable, rather than challenging them head on in a way that, as I said, will kind of derail anything else we're trying to do. There are some things where you can sort of personalize it. Okay, they've already acknowledged me as being in, so why don't I just, diplomatically talk about my own experience? Oh, actually, I didn't find that to be the case when I X.
Right.
Or that's interesting. I think I know what you're getting at, but there's again not a kind of a direct challenge. Now, if it's something that's over the top, there's sometimes you just have to say that's completely unacceptable.
But you don't have to walk up and punch him in the face, is what you're saying.
Right. That's not going to really get the job done.
So there's another polling question I want to ask, the next one. So Autumn, it's coming, but not quite yet. So now you're the CEO of an organization, and I know, and you've shared with me some of the work you're doing in the D&I space, but can you answer this question around having a formal D&I statement? So does your organization have something explicit that says that D&I is something important to you, and is it only in one place, or do you share it often, and is it embedded in different communications that the organization does, your company does?
Yeah, it's a good question. We do. We have our diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging working action group has taken people from all across the organization, across the country, including Canada. Actually, we have folks in Canada as well. And we have kind of as a group, we started with this group first, underlining our company's values, our mission, our inspiration. And that work sort of helped form the basis of our diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging commitment. We call it a commitment. It's not a program. It's not something we've done and it's done.
It's not a checklist of we finished it and now we're done. Yeah.
Not a checklist. I mean, there are certain things we do that are the hard things, that are the, taking off your clothes and looking in the mirror stuff. We have a dashboard that is run by our people resources department that shows how are we doing in terms of pay equity. Right. Our company is 54% women. We're a majority female organization, but while it's not a drastic disparity in pay, there is a disparity in pay. The highest paid individuals in our organization are sales folks, and the sales folks have only recently, and recently meaning the last 10 years or so, started to be much more female and more than just white. And while we're getting there, our population doesn't still yet line up with our pay. And we look at everything else as well. But to us, we have a formal commitment. We have a company culture book. We have that available on our website. We have it available on our intranet. We feature new articles and webinars within our organization regularly. And more often, when we are either engaged by a potential client, say a request for proposal to be a service provider, or we're simply unsolicited reaching out, we will feature our culture book and other sustainability efforts that we have that go along with our social responsibility as part of our outreach.
So Autumn, this is the perfect time to launch that second polling question, see how our attendees compare.
All right, poll number 2 is up on your screen. Does your organization have a formal D&I statement? Go ahead and cast your vote.
By the way, I'd like to take this moment to explain why I started laughing in the middle of what you were saying. Brad, I don't know if you noticed, but you made a comment about take your clothes off and look in the mirror, and I was like, oh dear goodness, oh dear. Did you just say that? And then as the conversation went on, I'm like, okay, I understand where you were going with it, but I wasn't so sure at the start of those remarks. I just want everyone to know that in case you were having that same thought too.
It's the honest look at yourself.
Somebody had a comment in here that says people call each other racist way too often these days. By the way, I'm not a white man. And I do want to come back to that. And so I'm going to flag that one. I want to come back to that comment later.
All right, looks like we have everyone closing in 3, 2, and 1. I'll share those results. 41% said yes, followed by not sure, no, and prefer not to answer.
Awesome. So 4% said no, but I will say that doesn't necessarily mean they're not working on it. And there are pros and cons to having a diversity statement. So I want to look real quickly at the Q&A because I will say I haven't been following it. So I don't know the context of when this came in, but maybe this is a comment. I've had the opposite happen. Why don't you go talk to our wives while us men review the business? That was, I think, the quote. Frustrating when you are the female that cleaned up FUBAR books.
Yeah. Well, I was just, my company had its annual meeting. This is the first time we've gathered since the pandemic.
Right.
And I just returned last night. One of the people we had was a partner company. It wasn't our company, but it was a woman who came from a firm, and we were talking about D&I issues actually. And she had come. She was in the financial services industry, and she was fairly young woman, in her 30s, and she said that she had quite often found that when she was in sales, the men were expected to take the clients to go golfing. And
sounds familiar.
And what about the female clients and the people who don't golf? And she said there was not only were the women in her company, sales women, not invited to golf, they weren't even invited to have another activity, which she suggested a spa would be great. And I immediately said, that's where I would have gone, to the spa, right, too. But I mean, this is a relatively young woman who still finds, like your questioner, that there is sort of the men are going to talk about business, the wives can go do that. But even when the women are in the business, they're often considered like, well, you can do something else, or you don't need to go do that, because this is what we're going to do with men. It seems it's hard to imagine we're still doing that in 2022, but of course it happens.
So earlier you were talking about, you're in the room, you walk in, it's a group of mostly white men. They see you and they're like, we're in the same group. So they feel safer to say some things that you might have a problem with. What about the opposite? What happens when you are the executive in the room and the people in the room are either one level below you or all the way down to first year staff? And I'm thinking just leveling. I don't want to put you in a position where you have to speak specifically about your organization, but based on your experience, can you give us an example of a challenge then that you're going to have? Because in that case, clearly you're the CEO. You can say whatever you want, but can you?
It's a good question. There are two wrinkles on that, or two kind of directions about that. A lot of times I have found that if I'm dealing with people in my own organization who are at a level or two below me, we might be reviewing, say, marketing materials. This is a pretty common situation. Now, we have a marketing team that's as diverse as a Benetton ad. It's great. But they will often, if they're newer especially, you're a newer, younger person who's not a white male my age, you might think the thing to do to please me when we're putting together advertisements or marketing information is put something together, just like an Uber driver might put on like whatever he thinks I like, soft rock or whatever the guests I'd like.
Yes.
I'm like, oh my gosh, are you doing that because you're profiling me? Please stop that.
Exactly.
I get the same thing even inside the organization before people get to know. Please stop showing pictures of a bunch of white men shaking hands in suits with calculators or whatever. That's not actually the world we live in, and it's not the world we really want to portray. They've sort of preemptively said, oh, I've got to please this middle-aged white guy who is the CEO. So there is sort of I have to kind of address that. The other thing I have to be really...
Wait, sorry to interrupt, but do you actually address it? Or do you see it and you think this person needs some coaching and then their manager kind of coaches them through that? Or do you actually say something?
We're small enough that I'll talk to people myself.
Okay.
And if their manager's there, I'll say, let's make sure we look a little at a broader group of photos, photo choices. And I might remind them, because if they are really new, they might not know. Look, yes, there are sometimes people shaking hands like that, but the work we really do touches everybody. And let's make it appear that way. But the other thing that's really important is to not dominate a conversation, because people will automatically, when they're in a room with a more senior person, they're going to, for self-preservation at least, want to defer always. And so you really have to work that's another aspect of this conversation. You have to work hard to make it clear you really want to know people's thoughts and they are in a safe place.
That's only going to get but so far. So I've had a bunch of different roles. I've been the CEO of an organization, I've run my own company, and I've been like senior management level. I've been staff, but that was when I was 10, so it's hard to remember. But I think that one of the challenges of leadership is you will never know what people really think. You can try to make them as safe. You can genuinely be open to that feedback, and you still may never get it. By the way, I'm going to move to this slide because I think it's kind of sort of related to what we're talking about. There are a lot of components to this work. And the idea that you can create a safe space for everybody to engage is particularly difficult from the top down. It's a lateral communication with peers and colleagues, maybe manager to staff when manager is more in the middle of the organization. So how do you address this then? Because now everybody's walking that fine line. Everybody's walking on that tightrope, if you will.
One of the things we've done, and I don't take any credit for this, we have pretty good people resources department in my company. And we've sort of stepped up since the beginning of the pandemic when everybody was working from home and it became even more difficult to have sort of normative interactions between employees. We stepped up the number of people resource groups we had. And these were oftentimes really meant to exclude, they were meant to be those horizontal discussion groups, and they could be around any number of topics. And
so wait, you're saying you had groups organized by level?
No, by a topic. So we might have,
okay.
yeah, you might have, for example, a group ranged around people who are parents,
Got it.
balancing work and parental issues, people who are dealing with work and illness, either personal or in their family, illness, other caretaking issues, a number of things that actually brought people together, sometimes across roles and responsibilities, but they had something in common that was actually very human, and through that we got a really an amazing amount of dialogue about things that the company could and should do to help support people better, to make them to frankly change the way we work so that they feel both that they belong more and that they can perform better because they've got some optionality they might not have had before. And it is difficult if you've got a CEO or a lot of high ranking people in those discussions for people to really be frank about, boy, what we really need is this, or did you know that our health benefits exclude this, or
never thought of that before, but until somebody brings it to your attention.
Yeah, we ended up out of this. That was a true story. We ended up doing an audit with an outside benefits consultant. We audited our health benefits, and we found that a lot of it, again, going back to the very beginning of our conversation, Jina, they were built around a population that looked a certain way 20 years ago. And holy goodness, we hadn't really taken a look at those. Really are not looking at the entire population, and the population we strive to attract as potential new hires. And so we had to make some changes. It didn't all cost more money. Some of it was just like, wow, look what we're not providing, because we didn't look at ourselves as that kind of an organization once.
So I'm sort of shuffling through a lot of things here, like what are we going to cover? Well, so I want to jump to the next polling question before I get to the next question for you.
All right, let me get that up and running. Poll number 3 is on your screen. Which acronym best describes your organization's efforts?
So actually, yeah, I see the acronym there. It's funny because I've been asked this question from clients. Should we change it to DEI, or is it still okay to be D and I? And I think there's a lot of conversation around naming it, but are we talking about outcomes and goals? And so I have the slide up from when we come back that you provided on poor returns on the usual diversity programs. I don't know if we can speak to that. We only have about, we actually have about 10 minutes, so that's good.
I'd love to get to the racism question too. That was an interesting
Oh,
one.
yeah. Actually, we could touch on that next. How about we do that?
All right, almost there. Again, this is poll number 3 out of 4, closing down in 3, 2, and 1, sharing those results because they are quite mixed, but 27% led with DEI.
Yeah, this is good. So, or some combination between DEI. Only 19% said something else. Of course, 14% didn't even want to answer. All right, so the racism question. Somebody said people call each other racist way too often these days. So I'll say this and then I'll throw it back over to you. I was in a meeting yesterday. I was in a presentation, and during the Q&A afterwards, the facilitator made a comment about racism. And my response was that I get a little frustrated that we talk about racism like it's an off-on switch. You're racist or you're not racist. And in my mind, racism is a spectrum, and we are all on it. And so we are on the more or less racist to almost not racist, or absolutely, oh my gosh, you're so egregiously racist. And anywhere along that spectrum, and where we are in the spectrum might vary depending on a lot of factors. So that's my thought. What's your thought? I was just sharing my
Well,
opinion. All right, your
no,
turn. Go.
what you said, I completely agree with. I will say this. One thing that I've noticed is that, and it touches not just on racism, but sexism, homophobia, everything else. When there's been a stigma or especially an appearance of that something is finite, that there is a rare opportunity. If
Mhm.
if women, for example, think that an organization can only have so many women on its board, can only have so many women as managers, you get a perverse competition among women, where I want to be the one. They're going to take one woman. I might actually, sabotage other women. Yeah, use some elbows. Certainly the same thing with, I'm a black man. I'm getting challenged by this Hispanic guy, or whatever.
Right.
The problem is this:
Right.
when we have lived in a society that has so much embedded bias, it's really understandable to me why bad behavior can be, whether it was deliberately or
Right.
not deliberately, why things can be ascribed to racism or some other ism, ageism, sexism, whatever,
Right. There are a lot of this.
because they've lived with it. You've lived with it, and it's impossible. And also, I trust people to sometimes see the subtleties that the majority may not. And I agree with the questioner that sometimes there may not really have been a racism involved directly, but if you've gotten bumped by that car enough times, you see the headlights again. You see it.
Yeah.
It's not surprising you might look at it the same way.
Not only that, but it's fair to flinch, to use that
That's right.
use that analogy. So I do want to, in all fairness, I want to get to some questions because there are a couple questions in the queue, and I see the time, and then we can come back to more conversation if that's okay. So this question came in a while ago. The question is, how do you handle people asking your ethnicity at work if they repeatedly ask what your ethnicity is? I have some thoughts, but Brad,
Well,
how
mine,
would you
I think
respond?
you should start, Jina. Why don't you start?
Why, you don't want to open mouth, insert foot? Wouldn't be the first time. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I mean, obviously for me, from personal experience,
Mhm,
I don't mind saying yes. I'm what I look like. I'm a white man.
mhm.
Uh,
But
who's
you don't get it a lot, is my guess, right?
No, I never get it. I mean, somebody might say, "Are you Irish? Are you German?
Right.
Are you from California or from Chicago? What's the what? I can't quite place that, and
Hmm.
there's no weight to it for me, right? There's no stakes.
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna say, "Oh, you're white, are you?"
Right. Well, you know what's interesting is, so if somebody were to ask me, I have never been asked specifically about ethnicity, but if somebody were to ask me about my ethnicity, I might follow back up and say, well, when you say ethnicity, what, what answer is it that you're looking for me to give? Are you asking about my race? Are you asking about my cultural background? Are you asking about the heritage of my family? I'm happy to share that information. I'm just not sure what you're asking me. And what that does is it helps open up the thinking that maybe they weren't even sure what they were asking you. And then the other thing is, you could ask them the same question back. I am Irish. What's yours? Tell me a little bit more about your background. Um,
Yeah, I think that's a good. I think it's a good response, and it's sort of part of it's going to be the nonverbal. What was the vibe you were getting when you heard it? It was an
right,
uncomfortable vibe. I think
right,
it's perfectly acceptable to say, I don't really love that question. Maybe let's talk about something else. On the other hand, if somebody wants to know, are you were you born in the United States? Are your parents, they come from another country?
context does matter, and timing, and where you are. I think anytime that comes up, if it makes you uncomfortable, that's, when you talk about what's an uncomfortable conversation, or when you talk about what's a microaggression, it's in the eyes of the receiver. It's not in the eyes of the person who's made the comment. And then, because you can't say something to me, Brad, and I tell you, wow, I kind of was a little bothered by that. And then you can't say, well, that wasn't my intention, so you shouldn't be bothered.
Yeah.
No, I was. And if I feel safe enough to tell you that, then maybe that's an opening for a conversation. So I think that just depends. All right, somebody said they were curious, and that was the vibe. And if they were curious, I'd be like, oh, I'd love to go to coffee and talk about that. And then we can share both of our backgrounds. I'd love to know more about you, if it was curious. Okay, Brad, somebody's giving you a compliment. Brad, good on you for asking the question that led you to the health benefits. Some groups don't ask these basic questions that end up keeping people happy. So there you go. That's a good one.
Well, it's nice. Thank you.
This one says, I worked for a public accounting firm where diversity was optional. I'm trying to understand that one. I was heavily involved in the programs and services to serve diverse staff, and yet mostly white men, male, most staff didn't even know we had these initiatives, were never required to even face the impact of the lack of diversity in the firm. So what do you say about that? So you and your organization start working on diversity, and there's a whole group of people who are in a privileged enough position that they don't have to worry about this stuff. And so then either they're not aware, or frankly, they don't care. How do you navigate that?
So that is really the title of our talk. That is one of the big challenges. If you've been in a privileged position, number one, you often don't see that. You had to work really hard. You've had hardships in your life. You got to a position and you think you got all the way to third base by getting a hit and stealing second and so forth.
Putting in the hard work, right?
Right. You don't see it as like there were people who were started behind the same starting line you were on. You worked really hard and you got there, and you don't see it as a position of privilege.
Right.
And so when somebody like me in my position starts talking very deliberately about expanding where we look to find talent, for example, you can feel it as a threat. Something I have is being threatened or taken away from me.
Right.
And some of that, okay, I have to say that's not the intention. If 60% of the US population is white and half of that is men, that's 30%. And if only half of them are in the top of the bell curve of talent, do I really want to look for 15% of the population to get our next hire? That's silly. Just talking through that tells you why we would embark on things. But it is sometimes a challenge. People say, look, this isn't core to our profits. This isn't
right.
This is something we should be just looking for the best people. And when we're not looking for the best people, we should just be demanding, right?
Right.
So it is.
But we said we want the best people. We want people who would be a good fit.
All of that. Right. And they used to say that about sports teams and the military and everything else. And we got over that hurdle in some, in some arenas. And we found, lo and behold, the best people look like all different people.
Right. There's no archetype for the best people.
And if people, again, going back to, as you said, we all have our spheres, right? And you confront people with the notion of gender fluidity, and they suddenly feel like, why do I have to remember to call that person they or them or their? Why do I have to use that? Or why Alex, the guy who I used to be on the bowling league with, still calls him, herself, Alex, but identifies as a woman. Am I supposed to say she now? I mean, and people, they feel that's somehow a challenge on them rather than, and you do sort of have to, I think, turn it and say, can you imagine how uncomfortable you might feel if you didn't feel like you were in the right gender, or that You know, that's a much bigger challenge than you remembering a pronoun. And if you
Right.
make a mistake, you make a mistake, no biggie.
It's not that you made a mistake, it's whether or not you try. You know, it's my name, Jina, and people are like, oh, I don't know how to say that. I'm like, I don't care if you get it right. All that matters to me is you try. Because the minute somebody's like, oh, I can never say that, and then they dismiss it as if, you know, that's one of those hard names. It's like, I'm not sure what's behind that, but it does feel a little dismissive. And there are all kinds of things like that. There was a conversation I was literally just having over coffee with my husband this morning. There's a whole backstory as to why, but we were remembering a moment where I was told by a white woman from the context of the conversation that I was so articulate. And she said it from the perspective of, wow, I didn't know Black people talk so good. Like that kind of articulate. So I was sharing the story with another colleague. Gerard was there and we were having a conversation and I was sharing it. And the colleague says to me, well, I mean, what's the big deal? And so I said to my colleague, who was white, well, would you say that to one of your white colleagues? And then they said, oh, because they would never think to say that to one of their white colleagues. And I think to the question of pronouns or any of these other challenges, people don't always see themselves in the challenge and themselves in the problem. It's them, it's they, it's out there because they have good intentions. Instead of thinking about the impact that they're having on people, rather than only focusing on what they meant to say or what they meant to do, instead acknowledging what the actual effect of what you said is or did is. All right, so there are a lot of things in here, but they're mostly comments. I found more alienation from all that is happening around me, and it hasn't helped me one bit. It's great to see a white person acknowledge that embedded bias is real. Pronouncing someone's name correctly to me is the most important connection you can make with somebody. I hadn't thought of that. I always ask if I'm not sure. It's so important to showing the value of another person, which includes pronouns. I'm from another country and not white. I feel like even things that no one bothers about, I feel like even things that no one bothers about is unnecessarily blown up and is not helping with friendships. Not sure I understand that one. Did you understand that one?
Oh, I think it's the sensitivity issue. I'm thinking somebody thinking people can be oversensitive, and some people may, but I think it's, as you said, try to go to where they are, especially if you are in a sort of a privileged group. It doesn't really, it's like a smile doesn't cost anything. It doesn't really cost much to ask somebody how they like to be treated.
You know, what does it cost you to be kind? That is an interesting question, particularly given the dynamics that we are in society. I'll leave it there.
We talk about the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you like them to do unto you. But we have the platinum rule is do unto others like they like to be done unto. You know, how do they want to be treated, not how you want to be treated.
That's true. By the way, Elizabeth said Brad is great. Thank you. Don't let it go to your head, but she did say.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
All right, it's 3:56. We have 4 minutes left. So before we do the fourth polling question, I do want to let everybody know as a reminder, this is a biweekly webinar series. And so next 2 weeks from now, September 2nd, James Saw is joining me. He's the Chief Operating Officer at New Orchard. James and I met years ago when he was at NASBA. He's a data genius. And he's going to be here not necessarily to just talk about these are the data pieces you need to get and why, but how does data help us understand what's happening between us humans and organizations? It's I hope it to be a very enlightening conversation, and I hope everyone can join us. So Brad, I'm going to give you 30 seconds or a minute to do the last, any final thoughts before we do the polling question, and then pass it back to Autumn to close us out.
I guess the thing I would say as a leader, you're often who's trying to actually advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. You know you're going to be oftentimes pinched between those who think you're distracting from the central purpose of your business, and those are usually people who are already privileged to some extent, and by those who think you're saying something, but you're not doing enough. And
Mhm.
you need to think about both those groups and bring them along and just do your very best to treat people as well as you possibly can. Everyone will do a better job and they'll be happier if you treat them as well as you can.
Yeah. Words of wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Wanted to remind everyone to check the schedule on our website for additional information, and we hope to see you on a future webinar. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Jina.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Autumn.